All right, let's just get right into it. We're tackling one of the most brutal, disturbing, and frankly, one of the hardest stories to read in the entire Bible, Judges chapter 19. It's a passage people often skip over, and for a very good reason. But the fact that it's in here is incredibly important, and we really need to understand why.
And look, I'm not exaggerating. Pastors and scholars have literally called this the premier horror story of the Bible. So if you read this and your stomach turns, well, that's the point. That's exactly the reaction the ancient author was trying to get out of you. This story is designed to be horrifying.
Which, of course, brings us to the elephant in the room. The big question that so many people ask: why on earth is a story this graphic? I mean, we're talking about gang rape, murder, and dismemberment. Why is it in a holy book? Is the Bible actually endorsing this stuff? Well, let's break it down.
So, here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at the chaotic world this all went down in. Then, we'll see how the story is a shocking and intentional echo of Sodom. After that, we'll examine the complete moral collapse of the characters. And finally, get to the big why. Why this horror story is actually a desperate cry for a true hero.
Okay, first things first, context is everything. We have to understand the setting. The book of Judges describes one of the absolute darkest and most chaotic periods in the history of Israel. And the author gives us a single phrase that's basically the key to unlocking the whole mess. This line is like a drum beat. It gets repeated 4 times, basically bookending the story we're talking about. And listen, this isn't just a political comment like, oh, we need a president. No, the real point is that Israel had rejected God as their king. And when an entire society cuts itself loose from any real moral standard, this is what you get: total chaos. The whole book of Judges is built around this tragic, repeating cycle. You see it over and over. Israel sins, they get oppressed, they cry out to God, God sends a deliverer, and then, the moment that leader dies, they fall into even worse sin than before. With every single cycle, the nation is in a moral nosedive. And this story, this is them hitting rock bottom. So now let's get into the story itself, because the author does something brilliant, but also absolutely chilling, to make his point. He wants to trigger a memory for anybody who knows the first book of the Bible, Genesis. He crafts this story in Judges 19 to be a direct, unmistakable echo of the infamous story of Lot in the city of Sodom. This is not a coincidence. It's a deliberate, literary move designed to create a parallel that is absolutely shocking. I mean, just look at how precise this is. In both stories, a mob surrounds a house and makes the exact same demand. They shout, "Bring out the man so we can know him." And that word "know" is a biblical euphemism for the most violent kind of sexual assault. And the horrifying parallel just keeps going. In this twisted, insane attempt to protect their male guests, both hosts make an unthinkable offer. They offer up their own daughters, their own female family members, to the mob instead. It gives you a terrifying window into a worldview where women were completely disposable. So this is the punch to the gut. The author is screaming at his readers, do you get it yet? We have become Sodom. This city in Israel, Gibeah, has become just as morally bankrupt as this city that's famous for being the worst of the worst. God's chosen people had become just like the people God had judged. But here's the kicker. The story in Judges is, in some ways, even worse than the one in Sodom. Remember, in Sodom, divine messengers, angels, stepped in and protected Lot's daughters. Here in Gibeah, there's no divine rescue. There is only the complete and total moral failure of every single man involved. The men of the city are obviously evil. The host fails catastrophically. But the most damning failure of all belongs to the Levite. This guy is supposed to be a spiritual leader. He's from the priestly tribe, and instead of protecting his concubine, he physically grabs her and throws her out to the mob just to save his own skin. His heartlessness the next morning is just bone-chilling. He finds her collapsed on the doorstep, and the only thing he says is, "Get up, let's go." There's no compassion, no remorse, nothing. The one person who should have protected her saw her as nothing more than an object. Which brings us to the story's final, gruesome act. What could possibly possess him to do something so bizarre and horrific? To dismember her body and send the pieces all across Israel? Let's be really clear here. This was not about getting justice for her. This was about vengeance for his own violated honor. It was a gruesome, shocking call to arms. And even worse, it was a tactic he copied from the pagans. the spiritual leader had become so corrupt that he was using the playbook of his enemies.
So, let's bring this all home. Why record this? What is the ultimate point of putting this nightmare of a story in the Bible?
Well, it comes down to a really important idea. The Bible has two kinds of text: prescriptive, which tells us how we should live, and descriptive, which just tells us what did happen. Judges 19 is brutally descriptive. It's recording evil, not condoning it. The author isn't saying this is good. He's saying look at the absolute horror that happens when people walk away from God.
The story's shock value is its purpose. You can think of it like a prophetic scream. It's meant to be a mirror, forcing Israel to look at itself and see the monster it had become. This is a portrait of a society where everyone does what's right in their own eyes, and the result is hell on earth.
And that's the ultimate takeaway from the entire book of Judges. It shows us that Israel's greatest enemy wasn't some foreign army. It was their own sin. The human deliverers, the judges, they were all flawed. They were part of the problem. What the nation needed was to be saved from itself. So the book ends, and it leaves us with this haunting reality. A nation has hit rock bottom, and it's crying out for a king. But what kind of king could possibly fix a problem this deep? What kind of leader could rescue a people not just from their enemies, but from the darkness inside their own hearts? And that's the question Judges left hanging in the air, perfectly setting the stage for the rest of the story.